Hello and welcome to today's panel discussion on implementation strategies to avoid common pitfalls. My name is NS Rao. I'm the Vice President at MetricStream, where I help customers across North America region to derive full value out of MetricStream GRC suite of products. To set the stage, organizations pursue governance, risk, and compliance projects for a variety of reasons, including simplifying the complexities associated with information management, understanding an organization's holistic risk profile, process execution, and stakeholder coordination in light of increasing market volatility, regulatory complexity, and security challenges. However, the broad reach of GRC solutions create a unique set of deployment challenges from both technical and business perspectives. Execution delays, project management missteps, and spiraling costs can erode the value of GRC deployments and, in the worst case, even lead to an abandoned projects. So this raises the question, how can organizations avoid common pitfalls of GRC implementation? We have a great panel here to share their valuable experience in this topic. Let's begin with a quick round of introductions. Jennifer, can you briefly introduce yourself, followed by Lindsay and Martin?
Sure. My name is Jennifer Andrews. I'm a senior manager in compliance and ethics at Pacific Gas and Electric Company in California. So my team provides enterprise level compliance management, governance, strategy, guidance, and tools, including the responsibility for the GRC tool. We've been working on our GRC tool since 2017. It's live, and rollout has started across the company with a small number of active users. We really expect and hope that this tool will make it easier to collaborate across all the work groups, increase efficiency around compliance management, and improve transparency overall.
Hello, my name is Lindsey Volkowski. I'm the Director of Enterprise Risk Management at ATB Financial. My team takes care of the holistic view of risks across the financial institution, and we're also leading the GRC implementation. We are about 4 years into our implementation with GRC foundations and one ICOFR, or as we call, I guess, more commonly called SOX module live. Our end goal out of the system is to get holistic risk views and connect our processes, controls, and risks all together.
Hi, I'm Martin Richardson. I'm a financial controller working in BA Systems in Saudi Arabia. BA Systems is Europe's largest defence contractor. Back in 2017, I took over functional responsibility for the GRC toolset, and since then I've been running a remote team to deploy the MetricStream compliance application across BA Systems. Our system live in April this year. We've got a total user base of about 1,000 people spread over 20 business units. For us, M7 provides a robust process for capturing control owner self-assessments, managing financial control issues, assessing the effectiveness of our processes, and ultimately allowing financial conductors to assess their overall financial control environment.
So thanks everyone for the introductions. Let's get started with the stakeholder management topic. One of the important part of ensuring a successful implementation is making sure that the right stakeholders are involved in the decision-making process. So the question really, what stakeholders did you rely on the most during your implementation and post-implementation as well, because the journey continues? And have you formed a GRC steering committee or a governance structure to get aligned with the stakeholders? So Martin, let's start with you.
Yeah, so BA Systems operates as a federated business. Each business unit has a finance director and they're responsible for running their own areas. They can choose whether or not they align to a corporate initiative, such as the deployment of a GRC toolset. For this particular governance process, we didn't have any strong central direction. It was up to the businesses to decide how to do their control and self-assessments. So we had about 20 finance directors plus their governance teams to get on board as a stakeholder group. To really ensure that we had alignment, I set up a steering board with some of the group finance directors. They look after the air, maritime, shared services business. And actually, that was really invaluable in our implementation, because not only did we get their advice, but we used them to influence that group of 20 finance directors, so that we could ultimately go live as we had planned and get them on board. I also relied heavily on a project manager who helped guide us through some of the corporate governance of setting up a new IT system. So we had things like off-network security, the legal function had to approve whether I'd be stored in the cloud rather than on-premise. And also we had to deal with how were costs going to be divided up amongst all those business units, each organization.
Wow, that sounds like you had to manage a lot of stakeholders. So have you experienced any slowness in the decision-making process, Martin?
Yeah, definitely on the corporate governance side, the security and legal teams took much longer than we expected. I think due to the sensitive nature of our business, as a defence contractor, they have an adversity to sharing data off our networks. So we had to go through quite a rigorous process to ensure, we were compliant with their requirements. Ultimately, it took us 8 months from when we selected MetricStream as a vendor to actually getting on contract with them as we were going through that process. Having a project manager in our IT delivery stream really helped navigate through all those requirements. And my advice to others really is, if you find yourself in a similar situation, is engage with those kind of stakeholders early.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks for those insightful thoughts. Jennifer, could you share your experiences, please?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to reiterate Martin's point about having a strong project manager. For us, during implementation, when we were in that project mode, one of the first things we did was we worked with probably over 90 different business partners across the company while we were going through the process to gather and really define what our business requirements were. These were primarily line of business compliance leaders and their teams. Then during design and configuration, we stood up a working group that represented more than half the lines of business to really participate in that process. And then at the same time, we also regularly met with a director level steering committee where we could really discuss and decide on certain strategies and processes as necessary. Another important point during this phase, and frankly, even post-implementation, is having that senior and executive leader support with the appropriate authority. For us, that was our Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer, but not just that single project sponsor, but also having senior leadership support across any line of business or user group that you will be engaging.
Yep, that sounds great, Jennifer. How about post-implementation? Have you observed similar level of engagement from the stakeholders?
Sure. So it's evolved a bit, post-implementation, now that we're in the middle of rolling out the functionality and focusing on user adoption. One of the key things we've done is we engaged and we regularly meet with representatives from all the lines of business and user groups. They are essentially our power users and our change ambassadors. We also recently stood up a platform governance committee for the company. Now that the system is in place, we found that we wanted to make sure there was, a defined process for any, proposed system design or configuration changes or any new use cases, to make sure that we really understood all the impacts appropriately.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Lindsay, I know your experiences are slightly different compared to Martin and Jennifer, as you have implemented GRC tools recently twice. Could you share your experiences in that regard?
Sure. So I think the first time around we had engaged the correct stakeholders, so similar stakeholders to Martin and Jennifer. But because that implementation was not overly successful, we had a bit of a erosion of trust. So really, I would say lessons learned, if you have some stumble along the way on your implementation of your GRC system, really what we did to get that trust back, we engaged a credible consulting partner and have really leveraged their experience and critical advice to have our stakeholders kind of come back on board. We've also developed a design review committee, and that's been a fantastic way to get, first line risk managers, what we call our sponsoring group, which is each app has a sponsoring individual or group attached to it, and then have some of our executive steering committee members rotate through attending those design review committees so they can really see the design decisions and the impacts across the organization. And I would say when you're building up trust again with those stakeholders, to make sure that they stay engaged is to ensure that you kind of promise smaller, scope smaller, and deliver on those small wins, which we've done with that SOX, or as we call it again, the iCofer app, to make sure that you can maintain and demonstrate trust and deliver to scope and on time what you promised.
Excellent point, Sal. Let's transition now to the project planning and rollout approaches. Uh, we find it it is better to focus on a rollout plan that sequences different functionality to be introduced into the solution over a period of time. This approach typically introduces less risks, smoother user adoption, and a quicker realized value of the solution. Do you use a phased approach or a more of a big bang approach when rolling your solutions out throughout the organization? And also at the same time, what benefits did you observe from your rollout approach? So Jennifer, let's start with you.
Sure. So we were definitely more of the big bang approach during product development and configuration. We stood up 6 different applications in M7 all at the same time from a technical point of view. A couple of reasons for this had to do with IT project funding opportunities, and frankly, the fact that many of our lines of business were ready and looking for this type of functionality. When we got to the actual rollout, we discovered it would have been fairly challenging and a bit overwhelming for all the users to understand and implement everything all at once. The tool does, a large number of different functions. And so, one tip would be that no matter what you have in place, that there are a lot of benefits to focusing on rolling out the smaller subsets of functionality. Start with foundational elements, make sure you define and understand your functional processes and then prioritize them. Think about how you're going to, roll those out as part of your program. Run pilots, focus on adoption with the smaller user groups first, because if you start small before you go big, that gives you more space to learn and adapt.
Thanks, Jennifer. Lindsay, you tried out both Big Bang and phased rollout. Could you share your experiences in that regard?
Sure. So for ATB, we at first had decided to go with a big bang approach and had scheduled to roll out 5 applications on a less than 12 months schedule, which is quite aggressive. So within that 12 months, we had to do all the functional speccing. We didn't have starting foundational elements, so those all had to be designed, data upload, and user training. Towards the end of that project, we had found there was some issues around things like data. We had rushed through some of the data design and had uploaded what I would call not very clean data, and decided, okay, we'll clean it up after we're finished implementation, which the downfall there is you start to break linkages that you've begun to build in the system. We also found that our first line risk managers were very overwhelmed with the amount of training they received. So they had to adopt not one new process or 2 new processes, but many new processes all at the same time. And we just really struggled. So what we ended up deciding to do was to take a step back and go to a more paced and slower delivery. So right now, as I said, we've just finished doing our foundational elements and our SOX app. I found this approach to be a lot more successful because users have the ability to digest all of the new learnings and changing processes and using a new application and that we were able to take the time that we really needed to focus on those foundational elements and get our data structures right. I would definitely recommend a small bites approach to a system implementation like this to get the full value.
Great points, Lindsay. Any downsides that you have observed with the phased approach?
Our one struggle has been our ability to maintain funding on a multi-year implementation. Some organizations may fund for all, 2-3 years of a project. ATB funds 1 year at a time. So it has definitely been an ongoing challenge to recommunicate the benefits we've gotten from the implementation of, let's say the first year of work where we're at, to then get funding for the next year and then potentially the year after that outside of your regular maintenance costs. So that is one challenge. If your organization does discretionary funding for each fiscal year as a standalone, you may experience.
Got it. Very interesting. There were two different approaches taken, and both paths led to the conclusion that it's best to start with a small and focused use case or a phased approach. So that's quite interesting and insightful as well. So with that being said, let's transition now into training and onboarding process. So the question really, within your rollout plan, did you capture onboarding and training activities for your users? What benefits were realized from these activities? So Jennifer, let's start with you.
Sure. So we did find that it was beneficial to have a mix of training and awareness activities. Pretty much every user has different needs at different times. For example, we had instructor-led training. We've been holding WebEx-based monthly learning sessions on a wide variety of smaller topics. We've also published a number of job aids and procedures, so this type of information was ready and available whenever people needed it. For us, we focused on a train the trainer model. We found that this was more sustainable, and having from a user perspective, when they're hearing from someone within their own line of business that can relate more to whatever their personal experience will be, this is making adoption a bit easier. This also leads you to having a distributed model, a distributed network of champions, and that increases that sense of ownership. And we have definitely seen that the lines of business that have embraced this train the trainer model have been the most successful to date. And then a final tip that we'd included in our rollout plan was to implement a sandbox environment. This will, reinforce the training and allows users to put what they've learned into practice immediately.
Got it. Lindsay, you plan very effectively to train users, so please share your experiences.
So what we did was in the project planning phase, we identified all the areas where we would either need user engagement or small bites of user training to take place. So each area really understood before the project even kicked off when we would need them, for how much time we would require of them, and then what those expectations are. So what the topic of training might be, so they would be prepared to be engaged and understand what's going on. We are also, much like Jennifer, doing train the trainer. So that's being conducted actually right now virtually because of the pandemic situation. And we will see probably in about 6 months if that approach to do early identification of user training needs and then train the trainer is successful, or if we need to rejig that approach, which I will also say is another great feature of doing a phased implementation, because if you've done something that hasn't quite worked out in one app, you can always readjust and redeploy for the next app.
Thanks, Lindsay. Looks like planning made a big difference in your success, Lindsay. It's good to know. Martin, your training and awareness programs were impacted due to the pandemic. Could you talk us through your creative approaches to overcome the challenges faced?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Lindsay and Jennifer said, we identified training early on as a key part to enable adoption. Unfortunately, the lockdowns associated with the pandemic hit us just as we were rolling out the training program, so we ended up cancelling a lot of things. Instead, what we did, we tried to go a bit creative. So we stood up an intranet site and ended up recording a series of WebEx training that we could load there, and therefore users could watch those in their own time when their bandwidth allowed it out for them. We are planning to run some more remote training sessions now that we're kind of in a steady state where some of the issues that we had around the technology and the bandwidth associated with everyone working from home has sort of been resolved by our IT team. What we did find actually as well was that at elbow support, so almost one-to-one support, even if it's virtual, even if it's through Skype and phone calls and screen sharing, is actually invaluable to making this a success. So we rolled out a lot of training to that governance lead community, and we said that they're the first point of call to provide that support to the wider user base. I mean, that's proved a challenge with 200 users ordered so far. We've got to get to 1,000 users by July, so I think that's going to be even greater. We have had different levels of adoption by both users and governance leads as well. Some have very much taken ownership, that realise this is a new tool and they need to get on board. Others are much more on a journey to get there.
Excellent points, all. To summarize, early access to the sandbox, effective planning, and creative approaches are the key themes that we discussed here. So those great points for anyone to plan their training needs. Let's move on to the next topic, leverage packaged applications versus customization. So the question really here, when starting the implementation, did you say that to your teams that you would stay as close to the packaged application as possible? Did you align with the packaged application as the implementation continued? If so, what techniques did you use to contain the scope, both during the implementation and also as a pre-planning exercise? Lindsay, let's start with you and get to hear from you.
So our main objective has always been to be as out of the box as possible. Really, that is to contain upgrade and customization costs, to leverage industry best practices around processes that ATB has not already adopted, and to ensure in the future, if we are looking at different versioning upgrades, that it's easier to install that upgrade on top of fewer configurations. The approach we've taken to really contain that scope is to say, let's start with our end objectives for the application itself as a whole, and then work backwards for each app to say, what do we have to customize or change to make those objectives true? Therefore, that will cut down on a lot of the, I like to have this customized because I like the verbiage or the language, or it's just an easier process to follow. If you really focus again on that end objective and what has to make it true, you should be able to maintain and minimize any type of customization.
Excellent points, Lindsay. Martin, you carry a unique experience among this group by leading the charge to replace a previous GRC tool with MetricStream GRC. Could you share your experiences, how that entire process worked out for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, this was a replacement for a GRC tool set we already had in place. Therefore, the process was fairly well mature within the business. Although previously there were some differences in adoption. So some people used Excel, some people used this tool set. And that was one of the reasons we decided to go with a new system, was to try and make that consistent. We generally aimed to stick as close to out the box as possible, although we did end up having to customize the tool set, especially around some of the control testing. We managed to stick with out of the box for the surveys element and the issue management element of the compliance apps. Actually, we were quite pleased with that. One other thing that we set out to do very early on was to say, well, we want the tool to do all the reporting for us. What we found previously was that a lot of those kind of leads in each business would download to Excel and do their own reporting in Excel. And we wanted to try and get away from that because it's inefficient, it's inconsistent, it just takes up a lot of nuclear time and effort. So we did invest a lot of time and effort and money with MetricStream to build those reports into M7 for us.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of useful information for anyone who's in the plans of replacing their existing GRC tools. So thanks, Martin, for those insights. Jennifer, you have been using GRC tools for several years. So how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, so going all the way back to our design and configuration phase a few years ago, we always had the goal to limit customization for a lot of the same reasons that we've been discussing here. But we also found it's not always possible. So we did leverage the product features as a starting point, but there were some areas where we did need to customize to meet business needs, especially those that were driven by certain regulatory requirements. The tips are to be sure that you really define your business requirement and be open to those alternate solutions. Don't start with a solution in mind and then try to make it fit to the tool. And you may even need to adjust your business processes in some cases. In cases where you can't adjust those business processes and you find that you do need to customize, still try to limit that as much as possible. And frankly, most importantly, be sure to discuss any unintended consequences with both your IT and vendor partners. To help limit the customization, one of the tactics we took was, our department, compliance and ethics, as the project sponsor, really tried to manage expectations, especially with the working team that I previously referenced that was aiding us during the design and configuration, and really leading that effort and taking it as a consensus effort.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So I would like to add one point here from a GRC practitioner point of view. It is very important that to onboard the right SMEs on the vendor side. So in this case, if you're using MetricStream on the MetricStream side, with deep root product knowledge as well as a business process experience, it's a blend of product and the business process knowledge to help find solutions for certain business requirements. You often actually come across these business problems that which actually require a different way of thought process, and that's where the vendor SMEs actually play a critical role. And it's on the vendor responsibility side to make sure that is the right SMEs are lined up there. So great discussion there. Let's move on to the most critical topic, that's change management. In my experience as a GRC practitioner, programs often fail due to lack of change management plans post rollout of the tool. Jennifer, how important change management in your view to get the full value out of GRC implementations?
Yeah, change management is very important. The level of complexity can be very dependent on your particular implementation. For us, it was, fairly complex and challenging when we're still obviously in the middle of it. For example, that's primarily because we were moving from multiple solutions to a single solution rather than from a one-to-one, like Martin was explaining in his case. Some lessons learned: you cannot start too early. Change management should happen early on, prior to, project rollout. This is really critical as you try to reduce that fear of the unknown. And that also, tone at the top is an important part of your change management plans. And from our experience, we recommend sort of a layered approach. So you both need enterprise level initiatives, and frankly, ones that are driven by the line of business or user group, because that way it can be more customized to the particular stakeholders and they can better understand some of those impacts. And the last piece of advice is, no matter how small or big, really promote those success stories early on, because again, back to reducing the fear of the unknown and trying to drive that user adoption.
Just wanted to add one additional point to what you highlighted there. Organizations are finding it extremely valuable to hire a change management lead to act as a liaison between project sponsors and the business users. And the role of the change management lead really actually demystifying the tone at the top into more actionable plans like change management trainings, storyboards like brown bag sessions, lunch and learn sessions, So the change management lead is very critical in actually demystifying and taking the message back to the business users. Just wanted to add that point. And let's move on to the next one. We are approaching end of our time. It's a great discussion. Let's get to some final thoughts. So Lindsay, Jennifer, and Martin, can each of you give audiences one final key takeaway for a successful GRC program implementation?
I
Lindsay, can
would
we start
say,
with you?
uh, yes, sorry. I would absolutely say you need to get your data structure and your data mapping correct. That is the foundation of your system and your ability to aggregate your data together if that's your intent. As I said before, our end goal is to have a holistic risk view out of that system, and it is not possible without, again, having good data structure, data mapping, making sure that your enterprise risk taxonomies, processes, controls, and other libraries you might choose to use are adopted across the organization to reinforce that consistency and, again, to get to that goal of a holistic risk view.
Yeah, and from our point of view, engage your partners early, right? You can never go wrong with that approach. And also, as you have the choice, keep things simple where you can.
For us, it definitely allow more time than you originally planned. Things impact your project, changes happen, so you should build that in. Definitely read the fit gap document that changes the out-of-box system. That's what MetricStream will build to, so make sure you're absolutely crystal clear on that. Try and maintain the continuity of your point of contact with MetricStream so that you're consistent in your direction. And try and have dedicated resource during implementation. I know we didn't manage to source a UAT manager during our user acceptance testing, so I ended up doing that role as well as the kind of project lead, and actually, suffered for it. Our UAT could have probably been a bit better if we had done that.
Wow, those are indeed great tips. So let's wrap it up. Over the past half hour, we discussed in practical terms implementation strategies to avoid common pitfalls. I hope the audience has found this session both entertaining and informative as I have. I would like to sincerely thank my fellow panelists, Jennifer, Lindsay, and Martin. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking part in this panel discussion.